A new beginning after 60. At 62, Margaret Johnson sat on her porch in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, staring at the fading sunset. Her children were grown, her husband had passed away 3 years earlier, and the house felt too large for just one person. For months, she had asked herself the same haunting question: what now? For much of her life, Margaret had been a school librarian. She loved books, children's laughter, and the smell of fresh paper. But when she retired at 60, she found herself restless. Without her daily routine, her life seemed to move in slow motion. Her friends often talked about cruises, grandchildren, or gardening, but Margaret longed for something different, something that was hers. One night, while browsing old photo albums, she stumbled upon a picture of herself as a young woman holding a paintbrush. The colors in the photo had faded, but the memory was vivid. She remembered her dream of becoming an artist, a dream she had set aside when bills, children, and responsibilities filled her life. That night, she whispered to herself, "It's not too late." The next morning, Margaret drove to a small art supply store downtown. The smell of oil paints, brushes, and blank canvases awakened a part of her soul she thought she had buried. With trembling hands, she bought a starter set of acrylic paints, brushes, and 2 canvases. The young cashier smiled warmly and said, "Starting something new." Margaret chuckled nervously. Or maybe picking up something old. Her first attempts were clumsy. The colors bled together, her brush strokes uneven. She almost gave up after the third day, frustrated that her hand didn't obey the way it once had. But then she remembered the words she used to tell her students: every masterpiece begins with a single imperfect page. She painted every morning, sometimes for hours, sometimes just for minutes. At first she painted simple things: a vase of flowers, the oak tree in her backyard, her cat sleeping on the porch. Slowly her strokes grew more confident, her colors bolder. One day her daughter Emily visited and saw the canvases stacked against the wall. "Mom, these are beautiful," Emily whispered. For the first time in years, Margaret blushed. Encouraged, Margaret enrolled in a local community art class. At 62, she was by far the oldest student, surrounded by 20-somethings with bright eyes and boundless energy. At first she felt out of place, but soon she discovered that art had no age. She laughed, shared stories, and even mentored some of the younger students. They called her Grandma Margie, a nickname she wore with pride. Months passed and Margaret's home began to fill with paintings. Landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color, each canvas reflected a piece of her journey. One afternoon, her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, suggested she showcase her work at the town's annual art fair. Margaret hesitated. "I'm too old for that sort of thing," she said, but Mrs. Alvarez replied firmly, "Dreams don't expire." With a mix of fear and excitement, Margaret submitted 5 of her paintings. On the day of the fair, she stood nervously by her booth. Strangers stopped, admired, and even asked questions about her technique. When the first painting sold, a portrait of her late husband sitting under a tree, tears welled in her eyes. She realized she wasn't just painting, she was sharing her life, her memories, her soul. By the end of the fair, she had sold 3 paintings and, more importantly, discovered a new identity. She was not just a retired widow, she was an artist. Her story didn't stop there. A local cafe asked if they could hang some of her work on their walls. Soon, people began to recognize her name. She started teaching small painting classes at the community center, inspiring others her age to explore hidden passions. "You're never too old to start," she told her students. At 65, Margaret held her first solo exhibition. The gallery was modest, but the room buzzed with energy. Her children, grandchildren, friends, and strangers all came to celebrate her journey. As she stood in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by her own art, she felt something she hadn't in years: a sense of purpose. When a young reporter asked her what message she wanted to share, Margaret smiled and said, "Life doesn't end at 60. Retirement is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. If there's a dream in your heart, chase it. Don't let age be the excuse. I'm proof that you can always begin again." The crowd applauded, but for Margaret, the true applause came later, in quiet moments at her easel, brush in hand, creating not just paintings but a new life. Years later, when she turned 70, Margaret looked back and realized she hadn't just filled her time, she had filled her soul. She had painted over 100 canvases, taught dozens of students, and traveled across states for exhibitions. Most importantly, she had found joy again. Her story became a local legend, inspiring countless others over 60 to take the leap. Some learned music, some traveled, some wrote books, and some simply found new hobbies that gave them meaning. Margaret proved that beginnings don't belong to the young, they belong to the brave.